Hi everyone, I'm Allie Lomax and I'm in Honors Biology this year. For my 20% project, I'm going to be talking about chocolate, the benefits, and the effects of it. So before I start, I'm going to have a little chocolate trivia. If you answer a question, no matter if it's right or wrong, if you want a piece of chocolate, you can have one. First question, why were M&Ms created? A, to have bite-sized chocolate pieces. B, to waste less resources on wrappers. C, for soldiers to enjoy without it melting. Or D, to use leftover chocolate. That's not right. But you can still have a piece of chocolate. Jason? It is C. Good job. How many chocolate bars does the average person consume throughout their life? A, 500, B, 1,000, C, 10,000, or D, 100,000?
C.
Correct. What were Hershey Kisses originally shaped like? A, square, B, cube, C, ball, or D, the same shape as now?
Same shape as now.
Correct. When was the first chocolate chip cookie invented? A, 1874, B, 2000, C, 300 BCE, or D, 1937? Correct. Okay, so now before I get into the benefits of chocolate, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I chose this topic. So before settling on this idea, I had a few others that I thought would be really interesting, but when researching them, I couldn't find a way to bring them together, to have a structured project, and to have an end result that I felt really interested in. So I had to come up with a new idea that I thought really interested me. I love candy, so I decided to have something related to that. So I researched a lot on sugar, and while researching, I came upon the topic of chocolate and how beneficial it can actually be for you. So I decided to find out if that was true. Okay, so now let's talk about some benefits. From being very nutritious to boosting your mood, chocolate is very beneficial to your health. It improves memory and concentration, reduces stress, is very nutritious, and just makes you happy. Chocolate is loaded with nutrients that can positively affect your brain. Made from the seed of the cocoa tree, is one of the best resources available on the planet. These are the different types of chocolates. The percents count on how much cocoa solids there are in it. So white chocolate does not contain any cocoa solids. It's just cocoa butter, cream, and sugar. So you will not get the benefits that you will get from other chocolates that you will get from white chocolate. Milk chocolate usually doesn't have more than 10% cocoa solid. Confectioners will add milk to it to enhance its flavor and make it sweeter. And dark chocolate has the most amount of cocoa solids aside from raw chocolate, which is 100% cocoa and does not contain any added sugars. So these cocoa solids contain theobromine, which is toxic to dogs and other animals, which is why you should not feed your pets chocolate, and phenylethylamine, which functions as a neurotransmitter that gives you heightened focus, attention, goal-directed behavior, and task completion. So when I got to this point in my research, I had to kind of break down my ideas to focus on one topic to create an experiment and sort of an end result. So when I researched, or when I asked like a lot of my friends, the most like one problem that they have a lot throughout like the school week with tests and quizzes is stress. So when researching, I found that 3 out of 4 Americans have experienced more than one stress symptom in the past month. So I decided to test if chocolate really does decrease your stress. So I started to conduct an experiment for 10 people, including me, to see if chocolate helped us in any way throughout the week. So the first week, we were not allowed to eat chocolate to create a control group and something to base our data off of. And the second week, everyone was given a bag of chocolate to eat daily when they felt they were stressed or needed to boost their mood. So some questions I asked my experimental group were, did you notice a difference in your mood and focus between the first and second week? If so, what were some differences? Were there any major stressful factors, tests, quizzes, scores, etc., that would affect the results of the experiment during week 1 or 2? Did you eat chocolate when you were stressed or feeling down? If so, did it help? If you ate chocolate during any point of stress, within how much time after eating chocolate did you feel some stress went away? Have you ever in the past used chocolate to help reduce stress or boost your mood? And do you think that you will use chocolate in the future to help decrease stress or boost your mood? So personally, throughout this experiment, I noticed a change in my mood and ability to focus and want to focus. As to how it changed my mood, I felt I wasn't stressed at that time. Others said that they definitely noticed a difference in their mood, and they had stressful symptoms, they were able to focus and not let their stress affect them. So another thing that I found really interesting throughout this researching project was memory retention. Scientists recently figured out that there is evidence to prove that chocolate can help improve the memory skills that people will lose with age because of how cocoa affects the brain. So consumption of the cocoa results in nerve-altering and protective proteins that promote nerve cell growth, increase in brain function and brain communication, improvements in blood flow, and promote the formation of blood vessels in the brain and sensory systems. So because of all this brain flow and brain activity, your brain works harder and faster, resulting in this memory benefit. So some challenges that I faced throughout this project were first finding a topic for a lot of a lot of brainstorming towards the middle of the year, and well, I had a lot of ideas, but like they weren't like very realistic. So coming up with a new idea and finding something about it that really interested me was a little bit hard. And then also once I picked the topic of chocolate, breaking it down to focus on something about it that interested me most and I found very relatable was a little bit hard too. Thank you. Any questions? That's a really good question. I didn't really milk chocolate than there is in like dark chocolate. There's more cocoa, but I think that I don't think there's caffeine in all types of chocolate. Any other questions?
Is there a difference between like dark and white? Way did you research any mood difference between what kind of candy or what kind of chocolate you use?
Well, for my experiment, I had half of the people eat milk chocolate and half the people eat dark chocolate. I didn't do white chocolate because it's not really technically chocolate. And people, I guess, experienced the same things. It didn't really affect that much. It's just that milk chocolate has milk in it and like added sugars, so it's not as good for you.
Have you heard anything about chocolate helping blood pressure? Like you mentioned, blood flow in the context of memory.
Yeah, well, I don't know about blood flow throughout the whole body, but just for the brain, it helps because of the phenylethylamine in it. It gives you like more heightened focus, and your brain flows more, and it just helps with memory that way.
So how much chocolate did each person eat in like when they just needed a little extra booster? Was it as much as a Hershey Kiss or was it more?
Like how many pieces?
Yeah, like when you said a bag of like candy or chocolate,
Yes.
and like a bag of Hershey Kisses.
It was like it wasn't the Hershey brand, but yeah, it was basically like a bag with a bunch of wrapped chocolate. Most people had 3 or 4 pieces a day. Dr. Crothers ate his whole bag within like the first 2 days. So I guess it really helped him out.
What was a, I wouldn't call it a failure, but a really distinct challenge that you faced specifically, and how did you get around that?
Well, first, when researching chocolate at the beginning, I was really looking for like scientific evidence and more like proven facts. But a lot of articles only had like lists of things that helped, and it wasn't really giving me the information I needed, which is why I chose to do the experiment to kind of find my own evidence. So there was that, and also making my instructions for the experiment, I guess, clearer. So I didn't think I did that part very well. So if I like do it again in the future, I might do more testing on like memory retention because that's not something that I did an experiment on. But if I do, then I would make my experiments clearer and like better, I guess.
So the next steps would be memory retention.
Yes, because that was another thing that I was really interested in it. Because I feel like that would take more time and I'd get into more depth about that.
How would you end up doing that?
I'm not sure. I guess I would look more into it to see whether I guess probably one but I would just have to look into it more. Anything else?
I think in the future you should give us all a piece of candy first, and then at the end ask us to answer the questions. And then it will be perfect like memory retention.
Yeah. Thank you. Feel free. I can pass out chocolate.
I didn't answer any.
It's
But
okay.
anyway.
I have to get one more, but I have two. Oh.
Sorry. Should I start? Okay, everyone. My name is Lily. And so before I introduce my project, can you guess what I'm doing for my 20% project? Barbies. Okay, any more guesses? Okay, so basically I have an American doll here and some Barbies, and they are all dolls. And the reason why people like to play with them because we can dress them, and girls like to express their creativity. But I'm not doing anything with Barbies or American Doll. What I'm doing is, ball jointed doll. Has anyone heard of the name ball jointed doll before? Okay, so I will introduce that later. So before I start my presentation, I need to warn everyone that there's doll nudity. So if you can handle it, please close your eyes. And so let's get started. So first, how I got the idea of the ball jointed doll is that when I was back in China over the winter break, I was surfing the internet, and then I crossed the post, and this is about a guy made his own ball jointed doll, and I was fascinated with it right away because he made a doll that could move. You can move it around. So I decided that's something I want to do, and then as I was doing more research, I found enchanted dolls. So when I was young, I used to read those cartoon magazines, and then I came across them when I was really young before I got the idea, and they are happened to be ball jointed dolls. So I decided that's something I want to do. So I started some research, and I decided to make my doll with polymer clay. It's something I'm really familiar with. In fact, for my last year's final project for my literature class, I did it on polymer clay. And then I also happened to get an email from a professional polymer clay artist to answer some of my questions. I was really excited about it. So it got me more passionate about polymer clay. And I'm just gonna show you some works I've done before. And then so I started doing some research, and what I found that there's a lack of information about ball jointed doll, like the process of making them. So I ended up watching Russian videos on YouTube, which I had no idea what it was saying, but I could see the movement and see what she's doing. And then I also created my own board on Pinterest about like those diagrams people drew. And then so beside making a doll, I also decided to make a tutorial of how to make a doll, so anyone who wants to make a doll can make their own dolls. And then, so now I'm gonna introduce the different types of ball jointed dolls. So there are two types of joints, and then the first type is two ball joints, and the second type is one ball joint. And can anyone guess what that means? Or like if you look at I will give you a hint. So from the first diagram, this is an enchanted doll, and she has double ball joint, and this doll over here has single ball joint over here. So can you see that?
In the first one, the doll can move, their knees move. In the second one, I don't think.
You don't think they can move?
Their knees?
Yeah, actually it has a joint, but it just doesn't allow as much movement. For this one, it can fold up to 180 degrees, but for this one, it's only 90 degrees. So it has some restraints on how the movement, but one of the advantages of the single ball joint is, as you can see, you can't really tell that it's there. So you can hide more. So that's two types of joints, and there are also two types of string in the doll. Because the doll is made into separate pieces and being held together, and the process of holding them together, putting them together is called stringing. So there are two types of string. The first one is string them with spring. The second one is string them with elastic. So the ones showing on these two dolls were strung with elastic, as you can see the strings showing up. And the first one is being strung by spring. And then how can you tell when you see a doll to see if it's being strung by an elastic or spring is by looking at the joint. So if you look at the doll over here, you can see there are like these black dots, and these are wires going through the joint that holds the springs together. So for elastic, you string the whole doll with two pieces of elastic holding with hooks on the hand and on the feet, holding the strings together. But for the spring, each section has its own spring. like as you can see, like for example, like the doll over there, it has a spring inside the upper arm, and that's one piece of spring, and it has to be held on both ends. That's why it has the wires on the joints. So now I'm gonna introduce the history of the ball jointed doll. So the oldest ball jointed dolls were made in ancient Greece and Rome, so they are very old. And they were made out of clay and wood and had arms and legs connected to the body with wire. And then the first modern ball jointed doll were bisque balls made in 19th century and early 20th century in France and Germany. And they were made out of sawdust, glue, and they had joints. And that's like a very brief history of ball jointed dolls. And then I'm gonna introduce different brands of ball jointed dolls. So the first one I would like to introduce is Super Dollfie. That's the first ball jointed brand in Asia, and it became the standard of ball jointed dolls in Asia. Like when I was looking up like ball jointed dolls in Chinese, like you all came up with like a 1:6 ratio of SD dolls. SD dolls is short for Super Dollfie, and then Super Dollfie is one of the brand under the company Vox. And then like the vice president who created the Super Dollfie had a quote said, "Another yourself comes from your own heart." So she wants girls to express their own heart through their dolls. So you can customize almost everything on the doll. You can switch the head, the arm, the hair, and then like the head, everything you can switch, and you can make costumes for them. And then the second brand I would like to introduce is Dollzone. So Dollzone is the first ball jointed doll brand in China, because I'm from China. So this is very important for me. And then like Dollzone is very different from the other brands, because as you can tell from the image, it's very stylized, and each doll has their own story, and then each doll actually has their own poem. And then but they are in Chinese, so like when you look them up, you can't really see them, but they are very very exotic stories about the dolls. And then like the philosophy of the company is keeping originality of the work. That's why they have exotic dolls and very stylized. And then my favorite is obviously the enchanted dolls. So the enchanted dolls are actually made by the artist Marina, and then each doll takes approximately 300 hours for her to make, and all of the dolls were made by hand. And then like what she said about her dolls is that her dolls are more than playthings. So she also has, each doll has their own story. Some of them have tattoos. Some of them have very special costumes that show their story. So as I talked about all the stories about like how like other brands promote the stories of the doll to make them more than playthings, to give them a meaning and a soul, I would like to introduce my own doll, who's sitting over here. So this is the doll I made, and I gave her name Phoenix, because when I was young I watched a cartoon, and it was about a Chinese goddess making humans, and the first girl she made was named Phoenix. That's why I named her. So it's like has a childhood memory like association. So, and then after talking about all of the history and the different brands of ball jointed dolls, and showed you all the fancy ones. So let's look at the uses of ball jointed dolls. So normally they are used for artists to draw human figures, and I believe everyone has seen this figure before in like art class, or they have them in IKEA. So that's one use of the ball jointed dolls, and they can also be used for photography. So a German artist, Hans Beller, is famous for creating dolls with ball joints during the 1930s and using them in photography. So that's one of the uses. And then, so as you might be wondering, how can a doll be related to biology? And as I did some research, so there are 3 types of joints that my doll has that resembles human joints. The first one is called condyloid joints. So condyloid joints consist of an oval-shaped end of one bone fitting into a similarly oval-shaped hollow of another bone. And then this type of joint allows angular movement along two axes as seen in the joint in the wrist and the fingers. So you see you can bend your fingers up and down. And then in my dog, you can see the leg. You can go like this. So it's very similar to our fingers. And that's the condyloid joint. And then the second joint is ball socket joint, which possess a round end, ball-like end of one ball fitting into a complex socket of another ball. And this type of joint we can find in our shoulders. And then this organization allows the greatest range of motion as all movements types are possible in all directions. And this one I actually have it for the hip of my dog. So you can see it has a really big range. You can move in any direction. And then the third one, which I don't have on there, is called the pivot joint, which is our head. You can turn your head, and then that's the pivot joint. And then my dog also has the ability to rotate her head. And then after I talk about all the biology and all of the background information about my dog, now I'm gonna go in details about how I made my dog. So I made my dog over spring break. I spent 2 whole weeks on my dog. And then this picture over here shows how my desk looked after I made my dog. It was really messy and I had everything on there. And then this picture is my dog after it's done. So can anyone guess what kind of tools I used for making my dog from the image over there? Chocolate. Yeah. Every time I keep getting hungry while I was making my doll, so I had a box of chocolate over there. And anything else that people find?
I see glue and strings.
So, yes. So actually this is not glue. This is liquid clay, which has a similar function as glue. You can glue the baked piece of clay and a raw piece of clay together, so it serves as a glue. And then the string, because I chose to string my doll with elastic because I couldn't find the right size string for my doll, so I chose to use elastic. And anything else that you find that I might have used? But yes, which is not on there because I used polymer clay, which is a type of clay that needs to be cured with an oven. So I used the toaster oven at home. So okay, so I'm gonna talk about what I used. So aside from those two main things I used, I've also used a matting knife because I have to trim my pieces after I'm done. After they're baked into the right shape I want. And then I've also used sandpaper to file down the surface to make it smooth. And then I've also used a cutter over here to cut some pieces. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna get into details about the process of making my doll. So first, the material is very important. I use polymer clay, as I mentioned before, it needs to be baked. And then one of the most important things in this project is the liquid clay. Over here, it might not seem as important as the clay itself, but without this, I wouldn't be able to make my doll because not one piece of my doll is made with baked once. Like I baked them several times, so this becomes crucially important to connect the raw piece of clay into the baked piece of clay. So first, before I started making my doll, I started diagramming my doll, and as you can see, I made like a real life actual ratio of like a real human. And then I also I talked to my art teacher about the different joints, and she gave me different ideas. But her ideas were easy to achieve, but they are not ball jointed. So that's not the purpose of the project. So I decided to use double ball joints for the knees and the elbows, and then single ball joint for the shoulders and the hips. And then so on this image is my prototype. I made a prototype of different joints. Like I had a prototype of this double ball joint and then a single ball joint before I started doing my work. So as I figured out how it works, I started with making joints. So basically, I just roll a piece of clay into a ball and then put it through a skewer to make the hole so I can put the string through them. And then this is a diagram of all the joints I made. And then after making them, I made the arms and the legs. So they have the same process, so I'm only showing one. So basically, I roll a piece of clay into a flat sheet and I wrap it around the skewer and then I bake it and then I trim it into the size I want. For this one, for the process I'm showing on the board is the process of making the shoulder, because the shoulder joint is connected to the arm. So I had to trim the piece into the shape so that it fits onto the shoulder ball. So after I trimmed it and I put a piece of clay on there and I baked it, and then I added more detail to make it look more like an arm. And that's the same process for the legs. So it's a piece of clay on a skewer and then add more details. So it's like at least baked twice and need to use the liquid clay to connect them. And then another piece is the chest piece. That was pretty hard to make. I failed several times because I couldn't get it to the right size. So eventually I figured out the way to do it is I made a mold with aluminum foil and then wrapped a sheet of clay around it. And then I wrapped a piece of clay onto the upper arm I made around the shoulder ball so it fits perfectly. And then I connected the two pieces together, and that's already baked twice. And then I added more details of like how it resembles like a human body. And then as you can see, like I had a band-aid on my hand. I cut myself at the time I got to this point with a matting knife. And then the other one is the waist. The waist is the same process. So I made a mold and then I wrapped the clay around it and I trimmed it into the size I want. And I added the more pieces to it. And I believe I baked this piece 5 times just for the waist. And then it's the hands and the feet. So first I made the hands and the feet, and then I made little balls as the joint to connect them, and then I connected them, and then I put holes through the joint, and then I put the liquid clay in there, and then attach a piece of wire in there to hold on to the string after I string them. And then another piece is the last piece I made is the head. It was the hardest one because I couldn't really get the face right. So basically it's the same process of like the chest and the waist, is that I made a piece of mold, I wrapped a piece of clay around it, and then I added more details. And then I also attached a hook to the head so that you can hold on to the string that comes up from the neck. And then I actually made 2 models. So the first one, as you can see, is this one. It doesn't really have a lot of details, and then it has like a drawn on eyes. And then the second one I made over here, it has an eye socket, so I could make eyeballs and put them in there to customize my doll. But sadly, the better head I made was too big for my doll, which didn't work out. But I learned how to make it. So the reflection on my project, the first one I want to talk about is the challenges I faced. As I mentioned before, I had a lack of information of how to make the doll. That was the biggest challenge. And then as a process, I was at the process of me figuring out how to make the doll, I did some prototyping, and I failed many, many times. And that was very frustrating, and also cutting myself was pretty frustrating. And then like takeaways, one of my, like the first one is never cut towards yourself, always cut away from yourself so you don't cut your fingers. And then also another takeaway is that I learned how to bake clay several times, because all of the works I've shown you before, I made only baked once. This is my first time working with clay that's baked several times. And then that was also a challenge because I don't really know how to do that, and I have to figure that out before I start my doll. And then another takeaway is trial and error, because if you never try, you never know how it works. And then the next step of my project would be completing my tutorial, which I'm like halfway done. And then I would also like try like to string my doll with springs. And then also like if I want to connect with biology more, I might do something that resembles like the muscle of the arm. So see how like that works with the doll. Yeah. And thank you. Okay, any questions? Sure. Yeah, it just like my hand just fell off, so just
Oh, okay.
yeah. You can play around with it. Oh.
Do you think after you finish your tutorial, you'd make like more dolls?
If I get more time, I would definitely make more dolls because this one, if you take a look, is pretty coarse in my opinion. So I want to make a more defined dolls, and I would like to have a doll with more of a story because I actually gave my doll the story after I made her. So like it's kind of empty, but I would like to have a story before I make my next doll.
So, how easily does the doll break since it's out of clay?
Actually, I don't think it's very easily. You can break it easily because polymer clay is very strong. So once it's cured, it can last for a long time, unlike Play-Doh and it's like very hard. So I don't think you can break it easily. The reason why my doll broke is because the wire fell out. Like I strung the arms too tight, and if you see like it's kind of curled because I strung it too tight. That's why it fell off.
Are you gonna post your video on like YouTube or?
Oh, actually, I'm not making a video tutorial. I'm just making like a step-by-step like illustrated tutorial. Yeah.
Do you think you'd still post it?
I will see. I'm planning to finish this over the summer, and then I'm thinking of building like a Google site about this, and then I might share it with others too. Yeah. So if you're interested, I can share it with you. Any other questions? Oh.
How long do you bake the clay then? And how much did it change each time? Does it change at all?
It doesn't really change in size. So unlike ceramics, it shrinks. This clay doesn't shrink. Like I don't think it shrinks at all, but depends on the size of the piece you are baking. Normally it's 5 minutes. That's why I do add 275 Fahrenheit degrees. And then like as you can see on my doll, like the balls of the let me just show you. Of the hands and the feet were black. That wasn't intentionally like that. It was supposed to be the same color, like the beige color as the other pieces, because I overbaked it. I underestimated the size of it, and then I left it in the oven for too long. That's why it's like overbaked. It's burnt. That's why it's like that. So, yeah. So it was also like one of the things I learned is that you can't leave the clay in the oven after it's baked. You have to take it out right away, or else it's gonna burn. Yeah. Any more questions? Dr. Clark? In my future dolls, so from Enchanted Dolls, the artist, she actually makes dolls of different cultures. They have different skin colors, they have different stories, and most of them are from like native like cultural traditional like folk tales. So like for me, like my next doll, I might be making it of like some of the folk tales like in Chinese culture. Yeah. And because, as I mentioned before, I named my doll based on the cartoon I watched. So maybe in my next doll, I might make the cartoon character because I really like the show when I was younger.
So did you develop a story for this doll?
Not yet. I just give her a story because since she's the first one I made, so she's just like the first, like Adam and Eve. Like Eve is the first woman, and this is like the first girl, like the goddess made. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Oh, 我讲了。啊？
number of individuals tonight. So if you have to go, please just do quietly, and I thank you for staying. Go ahead and connect.
All right, so hello, my name is Jason Sato, and my 20% project is about the most common high school basketball injuries. The goal of my project is to educate the community of injured high school basketball players here at Worcester Academy. I'd like to first tell them about their injuries, how to prevent their injuries from happening in the future, how to treat their injuries, and how to self-diagnose their injuries with symptoms. Why did I choose this project? So I chose this topic because when I was brainstorming 20% project ideas, I always kept two concepts in the back of my head. The first one was, what is my passion? And the second one is, how can I help the people here at Worcester Academy and the community around me? So I found my passion to be basketball. And in order to connect basketball to helping people, the first thing I thought of was injuries and how the trainers help people with injuries and how they help them solve their problems. So with my project, the goal of my project is to help people prevent their injuries from happening further in their careers, which saves them time and effort when you need rehabilitation and regaining strength from an injury. The connection my project has to biology is the same connection that the body has to basketball. In order to understand basketball injuries and how to prevent and treat them, you would first need to understand how the body works in order to do a proper analysis on it. The first step of my research was looking at a study done by the National Athletic Trainers Association. It started in the 2004-2005 season and ended in the 2014-2015 season. It was nationwide, and the trainers from their respected schools would submit data to the National Athletic Trainers Association, but first it would be verified by their local hospital. So I'd like to share a question with you all first before I do anything else. It's the same question I asked myself during the process of my research. It's, what do you believe to be the most common injury? Is it either A, ankle sprains, B, concussions, C, ACL tears, or D, jammed fingers? Yep, Callie. Anyone else?
I was gonna say D.
D. So the correct answer is ankle sprains. Around 1,046 were reported to occur to the study, and around 244,000 were estimated to occur during that same 10-year span. Out of all the injuries, the fifth most common high school basketball injury was head injuries. Out of head injuries, both dental injuries and concussions were common. Dental injuries are caused by a contact to the head, and a good way of prevention is a mouth guard. A mouth guard will absorb the shock one would sustain from a head injury and prevent any teeth from falling out or breaking, while treatment is going to the dentist and getting either your teeth replaced or filled. Concussions are caused by a traumatic blow to the head or when you fall on the court. Symptoms of this injury is having headaches, vomiting, fatigue, ringing in the ears, sensitivity to light, and difficulty concentrating. Diagnosis can be done by looking at a CT or an MRI to see if there were any brain injuries that occurred, while an X-ray will show if any bones were broken during this injury. Severity can be measured in three ways. The first way is, did the athlete lose consciousness? Second way is looking at how many symptoms they have, and the third way is looking at if they have a hard time remembering things. A good way to test this is a baseline test. It's taken before the start of every season and is given by a trainer. It tests how people remember their sequences of numbers, patterns, shapes, and if one would take that after the suspected injury, then you could see if the results were different and how much of a chance there is that they did in fact have a head injury. Prevention is strengthening the muscles in the neck and the shoulder. When your muscles are thicker, it will help absorb the shock that one would sustain and help prevent any traumatic head injuries. The fourth most common injury, according to the study, was hand injuries. And out of hand injuries, both wrist sprains and jammed fingers were common. Jammed fingers are caused by a force to the hand, which causes the ligaments to overstretch and even strain. Tears and complete tears or incomplete tears are also common. Some symptoms of this injury are pain around the finger, swelling, tenderness around the muscles, and having a hard time moving your finger. Treatment for this injury is the Price method. It's protection, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Wrist injuries are caused when the wrist bends in a way it's not supposed to. This can be done with the athlete falls on their hand or there's contact during a play. Swelling and bruising are common to occur along with tenderness around the wrist. Severity can be measured in 3 degrees. The first degree is the least severe. It's when a ligament is stretched from a fall. Degree 2 is when the ligament is partially torn, and degree 3 is when the ligament is fully torn and detached from the wrist. There are 2 ways to treat this, either the non-surgical or surgical method. The non-surgical method requires a splint, and the Price method, it usually is for degree 1 athletes who only stretch their ligaments, and rehabilitation is common to regain muscle strength. While the surgical method takes a longer time to heal, it takes around 8 to 12 weeks to heal and requires attaching the ligaments back to the bones. The third most common high school basketball injury was deep quadricep contusions. The cause of this injury was contact to the thigh and bruising. Trouble moving was also common because your leg works in sync, and when one part of your leg is down, the rest need to compensate for that. And tenderness was also common around the leg. There are 3 degrees of this injury. The first degree is mild bruising, the second degree is having trouble moving, and then the third degree is little to no movement at all. Diagnosis can be done by looking at an x-ray to see if any bones were broken, and CTs and MRIs show the extent of the injury and if any muscles or ligaments were torn in this process. Treatment is the Price method. As I said before, it's protection, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Anti-inflammatory medication is common to take to reduce swelling around the injury and reduce pain. Rehabilitation is also common to regain strength. The second most common injury is knee injuries. Out of knee injuries, ACL tears were the most relevant, and it's caused in either 2 ways. One is direct knee-to-knee contact, and the second way is when the knee is moved in a way suddenly that it's not supposed to, because ligament is like support for your knee, and when you move in a way quickly, that support is kind of broken, so that causes the ligament to either stretch or tear. Diagnosis can be done by looking at an MRI to see the extent of the injury, while a x-ray is often ordered to see if there was any bones broken. Prevention is strengthening the muscles in the quadriceps and hamstrings, while the non-surgical and surgical methods are also common for treatment. The non-surgical method requires a brace in the Price method with rehabilitation, and this is strictly for non-athletes. This is because daily athletes face a force on their bodies that normal people don't, and your knee is often needed for movement, and if that's not stable, then you'll have a hard time moving without pain. The surgical method requires an autograft or an allograft. An autograft is a piece of tissue from your own body, while an allograft is from someone else's body. That piece of tissue is then taken and put on the piece of ligament in which you injured during your injury, and it's threaded back in and heals over time. While this takes around 8 to 12 weeks to heal, and rehabilitation is needed in order to gain strength back. The most common high school basketball injury is ankle sprains. Ankle sprains are caused when the ankle rolls or twists in a way it's not supposed to, and this often causes the ligaments to stretch or even tear. Symptoms of this injury is swelling, bruising, being warm to the touch, and tenderness around the muscles. Diagnosis can be done in 3 ways. The first degree is a slight stretch in the ligaments. A second degree is a slight incomplete tear in the ligaments, while the third degree is a complete tear in the ligament. Motion also plays a role. The more severe the injury is, the harder time you'll have moving your ankle, as you can see up there. While the Ottawa ankle rules is common for diagnosis, it's a way of seeing how tender the bones are, and the more tender the bones are, the more likely a bone fracture occurred. Prevention is wearing correct shoes in order to support the movement of your ankle, while stretching and exercise is needed in order to prevent injuries, because this kind of prepares your ankle for impact if any injury was to occur. The price method is common for treatment, and I'd like to quickly talk about the next step of my project. So for the next step of my project, I'd like to make a model or a prototype of the 3 degrees of ankle injuries. This is because of how common they are in high school athletes, and they're the most common, and that this would address the wider community of people that I'm trying to reach and help them with their injuries. Some materials I would need would be 3D printer and 3D printing filament. I'd like to use ABS and PLA plastic to make the structure of the bones. That's typically the strongest plastic, while there are other filaments such as NinjaFlex, which is a type of filament, as you can see up here, that stretches and moves easily. I would most likely use this for the tendons because tendons help for movement, while the ligaments might be a mix of PLA and NinjaFlex because they're somewhat flexible but also provide support. Just a quick self-reflection I had is that information was easy to find, and I found the sites to be reliable. They were mostly college sites or hospital websites and were by verified doctors, so I knew that the information was reliable. But some things I had trouble with was time management and planning. I found myself rushing mainly in the middle of March, making my presentation when I was trying to make a model. So I found myself kind of rushing when I should have been working on it throughout the whole process. Some problems I faced was finding a 100% complete way of prevention. Prevention is kind of hard to find because there's no complete way to prevent an injury because it's determined by the players around you and how the game is played. This is mainly the referees and the opponent's team, which causes injuries to occur. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. No, not really. I sprained my ankle once in 7th grade, but it wasn't too severe. Yeah.
So what's the difference? You hear a lot of times players getting diagnosed with like a high ankle sprain.
Yeah.
Sort of an ankle sprain. What's the difference?
The main difference is what part of your ankle is hurting. Mainly the high ankle sprain has to do with the higher part of your ankle around here, and that's often combated with either like a bone fracture or just complete soreness, while more of the lower ones are caused by, as I said before, an awkward turn or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, Isa?
So this is kind of a stupid question, but you were talking about the shoes before,
Yeah.
like how they're meant to kind of prepare for these ankle injuries. So is that why most basketball shoes protect like above the ankle?
Yeah, so it's also the attraction is needed for playing basketball because it helps you like move on the court so you don't slip every time you walk. But also it supports the ankle, and if you fall, it's more likely to like brace you for that impact because it's tight around your ankle, so it supports it better. Dr. Carly?
You talked about autographs and allografts.
Yes.
Where would that tissue come from?
In the research that I've done, I found that the tissue was mainly from another part of your knee, so it was like familiar with being part of your knee. But if it was really needed, it could be taken from any tissue of the body.
Have you come across any reports about cadaver tissue?
No, not yet. Anyone else?
Are we? Okay. So we just switch it off. Okay. Oh. Hello everyone, my name is Lena, and we did our project on sustainable fashion. But before we get into our presentation, we'd like to give a little context as to why we chose this.
Basically, we like shopping and we like fashion, but we wanted to go deeper and we wanted to connect our love for fashion to biology. So we connected it to the environmental impacts our shopping habits have on the earth.
Part of the way that this relates to biology is about the earth and pollution. We are both in favor of keeping the earth green and healthy and believe that the way we as humans shop is incredibly hazardous to the well-being of the earth. And the worst part is that not many people are even aware of the effect that their shopping habits have on the earth.
So because of this, we wanted to get the word out about sustainable fashion versus fast fashion. So to do this, we're creating a sustainable fashion show, and to make it more informative, we're doing a video that highlights the history of the fashion industry and the risks of the current fashion industry.
Scary. And welcome back to Channel 8 News. If you didn't know, Channel 8 is covering sustainability. Today we are discussing sustainable fashion. Two special guests are on the show who are going to tell us a little bit about fashion.
Hello.
Hi. So I heard you guys are studying the fast fashion industry. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about this industry and history?
Before the Industrial Revolution, clothing was more tailored. The people who made clothes did this inside their own homes. Instead of being on a time crunch, the workers mostly focused on the quality of their work. In 1846, the sewing machine was invented by a man named Elias Howe. This invention allowed department stores to play with the idea of mass-producing clothing. By the 1880s, garments from overcoats to shoes were being mass-produced in mills and factories. This can be considered the beginning of the fast fashion industry. Just like today, the workers were paid very little. In addition, the working conditions were horrible. Fibers from the textiles were contaminating the air and giving the workers a hard time breathing. Dyes from fabrics were toxic, and dim lighting ruined the eyesight of the workers. Fast forward to the 1960s, people were starting to buy cheap clothes to keep up with the latest trends. This basically completes the modern definition of fast fashion. Inexpensive mass-produced clothing that answers to the latest trends. Ever since then, the fast fashion industry has only gotten worse, but I'll leave Corinne to explain more about that.
Wow, what an amazing description of the history of fashion. Now let's go to our second expert, Corinne, who's going to tell us about the current risks of fast fashion.
Well, Dr. Crothers, I've done a lot of research about the dark side of the fashion industry. First, I'll talk about what fast fashion means to most people in countries like the United States. To us, fast fashion means cheap clothing that is highly accessible. This might sound great to our viewers, but our shopping habits have a detrimental effect on ourselves. Since the year 2000, Americans are buying 60% more new clothing now on average. This is not entirely our fault, however. Companies advertise their products to consumers in a very specific and effective way. See, there are two types of products, things that you use like furniture or appliances, and things that you use up, like gums and flour. Advertisers' job is to convince buyers that clothing is not something that you use, but something that you use up. So, now consumers waste a lot of money and storage space on clothing. Fast fashion has an even worse effect on textile workers in developing countries like Bangladesh. See, to keep costs low, fast fashion companies outsource products to countries like these. In order to spend the least amount of money possible, employees work in severe and hazardous working conditions. There have even been cases of textile workers sewing pleats of help into their clothing. Some examples of terrible working conditions is the case of the Rana Plaza disaster. This is a garment building in Bangladesh which collapsed, causing over 1,000 employees to die. To make it worse, before this happened, workers in the building warned their managers of cracks in the building. They would quit, but factories are sadly one of the best jobs available in developing countries like Bangladesh, even though the payment for long, hard hours is only $3 a day. The environment is also impacted by fast fashion. On a smaller scale, in developing countries where clothing is made, toxic dyes and chemicals are released into water supplies because there isn't proper waste management there. These toxic substances could cause cancer, birth defects, and other health problems. Another example of fast fashion affecting the environment is the waste in landfills. Every second, one garbage truck full of clothing is burned or put into a landfill. That's a lot of garbage, and it's even worse because most textiles are made of plastic. Lastly, as Lena said earlier, textile workers have always worked and lived in severe conditions. History seems to be repeating itself in terms of these occupations. Instead of moving in the right direction, we are staying in the same spot. In all, fast fashion is a problem that can be solved by people like our viewers. When you make the switch to a sustainable choice of clothing, you help people, the environment, and yourself. Back to you, Dr. C.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for watching, and have a great night.
Okay, now getting into the main part of our presentation, we have a little fashion show put together. Baby, in the lights, living royal. Take a look at these beautiful diamonds. And it's shining, and we're climbing to the top of this kingdom. Nobody can stop us. If having everything that I want is wrong, I don't wanna be right. Sitting high on my throne in control, this is some kind of lie.
Sorry. Thank you for watching the fashion show.
Okay, so now we'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges we faced and what we learned. So, making a fashion show is not easy at all. We went through many obstacles during the duration of this project. The first one was that we did not have enough funds out of our pocket to create the clothes that we would buy. So we decided that we would sell the clothes right after the show, which we are still doing if you would like to buy them. But we realized that this wasn't a surefire way to get back the funds that we would use. So we decided to create a GoFundMe.
Shortly after we released the GoFundMe, we got notified that GoFundMes are against school fundraising policies. But we had already received a fair amount of money, so we kept it open to friends and families only.
Another obstacle we faced was the making of the video. We weren't exactly sure what we wanted the contents to be exactly. We just knew we had to make it informational. So, after an intense brainstorming session, we decided to keep it simple and go with the classic newscast.
Now, you might be wondering why I was in the fashion show. So this is another obstacle that we faced. The model that was supposed to wear this dress didn't fit into it, so I improvised and wore it myself. So this project in all helped us learn a lot about modern and historic fashion industries, and it helped us learn how to sew a dress and shop sustainably.
We learned that it's pretty simple to buy sustainable clothing, but it either requires more effort by sorting through hundreds of ugly clothes to find a hidden gem, or it costs more money since sustainable clothing stores usually need more money to pay their factory workers a fair wage or to buy sustainable materials.
Something else that we learned is making a dress is very hard, and especially since my model didn't show up.
And my model didn't even fit in the dress.
So we're just going to show you what we sewed because we don't have any models to wear them. So sewing these dresses helped us put ourselves in some of the factory workers' shoes. So we have a good idea of what they go through making dresses every day. But they do have much worse working conditions than we do, so we only got a taste of what they have to go through.
Our next step would be to buy solely sustainable clothing and then to urge the others around us to do the same.
So you can start making more sustainable choices, and we're going to show you how. So here's a list of ethical brands that we think you should check out. So the first two are Depop and Poshmark, which are basically online thrift stores, and it makes it really easy to find gems. So Depop is actually where we got most of the clothes you see today, and Poshmark, we got a few items from there too. We also want to point out Reformation, which is a sustainable brand, and it's all new clothes. It's not a thrift store, and the rest of them you should probably check out, but we're not going to mention it. So Good On You is a website that rates brands that you might know of. So if we go to the website, it shows the rating. So for example, Marks & Spencer is rated good. And you can go on there to look at any store that you like.
So, along with this, we like to point out some unethical stores that you might have heard of. Most of these stores are big brands that you shop at, and we hope after reading this list you make more conscious decisions about where you shop for your clothes. But if you don't want to stop shopping completely, then we recommend going on Depop and Poshmark to search up the brand to see if there are any secondhand items from the stores.
Thank you for watching.
What evidence did you use to evaluate this list of unethical stores?
There's citations.
Oh, sorry.
We went to these websites and we also looked them up on the Good On You website, and they usually provide a description of why their brands are unethical.
And what were some of the themes and the major points?
Most of them were that they don't treat the factory workers well, and they have like toxic pollution in the air.
Do you guys shop at the unethical stores, and are you gonna like make a switch?
Yeah, we are not really the angels of shopping sustainably. We sometimes shop at these stores, but now that we've done a lot of research on this, we can go to the stores and actually like have a conscience about it and just think more about how we shop. And usually when now after this, when I shop, I first go on like Depop and Poshmark to find something unique.
Yeah, and also if we want to shop at more sustainable brands like Reformation, a lot of the clothes are more expensive and we're broke teens, so it's hard to find sustainable options that are not thrift stores. Yeah.
What materials, do any of these websites or any of your research surface which materials we should be trying to use for our clothing?
Well, in general, we should use less plastic-based materials like polyester or something like that. Oh, did you come?
A really like popular fabric is linen that a lot of these like newer sustainable stores use. So yeah, just look out for those. Oh yeah.
So there's I feel like there's a lot of social pressure culturally around fashion, right? People want to look a certain way, and you watch television, and people are wearing a certain brand, and people want to wear that same brand that they're wearing. How do you think you get this message about more sustainable options? How do you think you distribute that or make people more aware?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Well, now more than ever among the teenage community, it's becoming popular to go thrift shopping because you can find something unique and everybody wants to be unique. But yeah,
Also, as we mentioned before, a lot of these secondhand online stores have a lot of name brands that you can find, and they're usually for a cheaper price. So that could also be another option for people who want to have those name brand clothes. You guys want to come up? Well, you can start if you want. Do you want to do it?
Okay. Well, we know most of these, or like all these people, so we just tried to design clothes that kind of suited them in our eyes. We know Ava likes to wear long dresses, and Danielle likes florals, and Rihanna likes in skirts. So.
Yeah, so yeah, mostly our decision-making process was just what would look good on them. And then also we wanted to try to find something unique that you haven't really seen before, and that's really easy on like these secondhand stores.
So would you guys have chosen these outfits for yourself?
I love this skirt. I actually do. I really love my dress. I like a lot of the pieces that Rihanna has. This is like more of me.
Great, thank you.
passion of mine. Nowadays, I spend the majority of my life either listening to or singing the music that I love. Although I do spend a good chunk of my life working with music, I also have many other passions, which is what made the decision of what to do for my passion project so hard for me. However, I thought about what I still wanted to know about several of my passions, and realized that while I've always enjoyed everything that I know about music, I don't know much of the science behind it or the benefits of specific genres of music. So I'm just going to ask you some questions, if you all wouldn't mind raising your hands on this. Have you ever wondered if what some people say about music being therapeutic and good for use of studying or doing work in school actually true? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to see these sounds?
Which happens when one is in a deepened state of relaxation and meditation, which is this one here, and delta, which happens when one is in a state of deep dreamless sleep. So, working some vocals here, but this is just a short video of me talking through the process of how your brain essentially processes sound. How do our brains process the sounds we hear with your ears? First, the sound waves from the music go through the outer ear and through the ear canal, which is a narrow passageway from the outer ear to the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates because of the sound waves and sends that vibration to three small bones in the middle ear, known as the malleus, incus, and stapes. Those three bones, their vibrations from the music are increased and then sent to the cochlea, which is a small structure similar to one of a snail, full of fluid in the inner ear. Inside the cochlea, there is an elastic dividing the upper and lower areas. This is called the basilar membrane, which is used as a base to hold the structures of central hearing. Vibrations in the basilar membrane eventually cause the cochlear fluid inside to wriggle, which creates a wave along the basilar membrane. Also along the basilar membrane are sensory hair cells, which differentiate between high and low pitched sounds. These hair cells move up and down the membrane until something called the stereocilia gather on top of the hair cells and collide with the band in an overlying structure. This bend causes channels similar to pores at the tips of the stereocilia to open, allowing chemicals to be sent into the cells, which then creates an electrical signal. The auditory nerve transfers this electrical signal into the brain, where it is made into a sound that is recognizable and understood by an individual's brain. And this is the music or other sounds we hear constantly throughout our lives. So, just in case you want to keep track of this and also find more out about the brain, I have a small handout which I have in here. So, if at the end you want to know more about what parts of the brain that this is specifically stimulates and think about those, then this is one of the end that I can do. So, even though all of you may not have understood what I just said, or will believe me if I say that music is truly one of the best things for you throughout your life, here are 10 awesome benefits in an attempt to try to prove it to you. Amplifying feelings of happiness, excitement, and joy. You feel more happy with
you listen to the music that you love. Number 2, music helps you improve running and other exercise patterns. After studies conducted, it is shown that runners who listen to either fast or slow motivational music ran faster than runners who listen to either calm or no music. Number 3, as it decreases the levels of hormonal cortisol in the body when listening to the music that you enjoy. This directly counteracts the effects of chronic stress. So listening to music dramatically improves one's overall well-being, as stress causes 60% of all illnesses and diseases. Number 4, music helps to improve your sleep, mainly slower and more relaxing music like jazz or Irish records, and we will get into that more later. Number 5, music helps to reduce depression by acting as a natural antidepressant, mainly from the release of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine neurotransmitters in the brain. And we will also talk about depression a little bit more later. Number 6, music helps you to relax. A combination of soft writing and music allows you to eat less food, and it also helps you enjoy the food you're eating more while eating. Number 7, music helps to elevate your mood, more specifically, elevates your mood while driving. Listening to music that you love, or just any music in general, decreases road rage, and that therefore leads to safer behavior on the road. Number 8, music helps learning and memory skills. There's so much about this I'm going to say now because we're going to talk a lot about this later. Number 9, music improves your verbal intelligence, or speech. Some experiments conducted had children ages 4 to 6 take music lessons to track their speech patterns. The results show that 90% of these children greatly improved their speech patterns after just a month, and it also helped their word comprehension when they're being spoken to. And last but not least, number 10, music helps to improve IQ and overall academic performance. Music lessons help to improve your IQ and general academic performances, rather than kids who do not speak. So to speak more specifically, the first topic we're going to talk about is jazz music. Jazz is very beneficial for your health, as it helps to greatly relieve stress, affects your mood, improves your memory, increases language, and it also helps relieve depression. If you listen to slow and more depressing songs, then you will more likely feel sad throughout the day. However, if you listen to more upbeat and energized music, then you will feel more happy and energetic throughout that day. This is just one example of how jazz can truly affect your mood and mood. There are many great benefits of jazz music, and one of the best ones is that jazz stimulates your mind, so it helps you to retain more information, and therefore it improves your memory. Another one of these is that you show increased language patterns, like we talked about previously. And it also helps you use your imagination to complete a series of logical thoughts, in case you were able to come up with an answer before. For at least us students, and also your parents as well, one of the best benefits is that if you were to listen to jazz music for 45 minutes at least before going to bed, you would fall asleep quicker, sleep more deeply, sleep for a longer period of time, and be more functional throughout the next day. This is also leads into the next topic, which is depression and effect. If you were to listen to jazz music for 1 hour every day for a week, you would feel less depressed at the end of that week by 25%. In hospitals, jazz is most commonly used to help patients with chronic illnesses, even if they are small as migraines. And sometimes it is also used to lessen the need of medication during childbirth. Sometimes it's even used in place of anesthesia during surgeries and other operations. Though you may not believe me on this last one, jazz music actually has a better effect on your blood pressure than laughter does, as it can expand your blood vessels by up to 30%, and it also reduces the risk of death due to heart diseases or stroke by up to 15%. Another genre of music, if you'd like to consider it that way, is singing. So, by show of hands, how I'm going to list 6 things that are also benefits to singing. Number 1, it helps to boost your immune system. 2, it helps to relieve more stress. 3, it keeps your heart stable. 4, it increases energy. 5, it also helps to improve your memory. And number 6, you can think more clearly and stay calm while singing because of the use of correct breathing. So on top of the 6 I already listed, there are many other great benefits if you sing. One very fascinating one is that singing can actually change your brain by soothing your nerves, elevating your spirits, and providing you with the simultaneous feelings of being both calm and joyful. Singing is scientifically proven to be good for anyone, as it is also a way to help you live socially and attract other people, while it also gives you some anxiety and stress relief. Another very fascinating thing is that singing helps your nervous system coordinate more with movement, listening, planning, memorization, and language. So even if you don't think you're good, anyone can sing or hum a little tune whenever they feel like it, which is what makes it so convenient. And like I said, that is why it's my favorite. So there are many other genres of music that are also very beneficial for someone, even if they have different benefits. So just to talk briefly about 2 more genres. The first one is hip-hop and rap. The best benefit of hip-hop and rap is that it serves as a confidence booster through its lyrics and bass line. It also is strongly tied to emotions and activating the more creative part of your brain. And this is also a big part of motivation. So mainly through the bass line, you feel more motivated when you listen to it, and it also helps you provide you with more energy. And one very fascinating thing is that most rappers display unique brain patterns when they freestyle. Although it is not quite sure why, it is possibly because of the activating the creative part of their brains. And so overall, hip-hop and rap is great if you want to feel more self-confident, motivated, but still emotional and creative at the same time. If you're with me on this, I won't talk about it for very long, because I know most people don't like to hear about classical music. So there are many experiments that are going on currently working with classical music, since they were not able to be done earlier when classical was in its prime. One experiment I looked at was that there were 2 groups. The first group listened to Mozart for 20 minutes, while the other group didn't listen to any music and instead walked around and read a magazine with it. The results showed that the group that listened to Mozart actually had enhanced brain activity while listening, especially in the secretion of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter we talked about earlier, associated with happiness. Similar to jazz, classical music is also great to retain your familiarity of experiences and memory, which is partially why many parents choose to play classical music for their babies and toddlers. Scientists are now starting to look at genomics and bioinformatics to discover the process of all these different effects classical music has on the brain. And it's also helping them understand neurodegeneration, which is the loss of structure and function of different neurons in the brain. So, at the beginning I talked about wanting to visually display these sound waves, and I found a headset that would allow me to do that through a company called Neurosky. So, I recorded, this is just to remind you of the different brain waves. You will most likely see alpha and beta in what I'm about to show you. So this is just to remind you so you can see it. So I made a small video that is just about showing you the 2 different apps that Neurosky created to show you about the headset, and then this is also like you see a recorder going on, and it tracks the attention and notification numbers, so you know there are different parts of you that can also manage numbers as well. So this first part is the first part of the app. So it can track your attention, your meditation, and also it can detect your lips
I was wearing the headset, so I was focusing on specific objects. You can see that the numbers from 0 to 100 were closer to 100, if not matching it. Meditation is the same kind of idea, but obviously opposite of attention. So it just gives you some tips at the bottom for each one as well. So that's what that's saying over there. And then blinking. So I was wearing the headset, and whenever the screen face lights up, I was purposely blinking. And then at the end, you'll see that it is continuously blinking on and off because I blinked a lot of times in a row to see if it would work, and it does. So this page is just showing you about how to properly wear the headset, and it's showing you the different parts. So there's clips, a sensor arm, and it's telling you where exactly it should be so it works best. So you see at the top it's green, which means that it's connected. Disconnected is if you don't get connected at all. And then this is just telling you that if you have trouble with connection, then squeezing the earplug. So what's happening now is we're listening to some more upbeat jazz, and this is showing you what's happening in my brain right now. So on the other app, you saw that it tracked my attention and my meditation with numbers from 0 to 100. So that's what that's showing right now. So I'm just going to stop speaking for 10 to 50 seconds so you can see what happening with the numbers. So it's a little bit hard to see. I realize that you can't actually read the numbers when it's on airplane, but the numbers of attention are a little bit higher right now because I'm focusing more on a specific object. But the numbers change constantly, so every second the numbers are all changing around, and there's generally a balance between 30 and 70. Okay. So you see that happening. And then now I'm just going to hum a little tune so you can see the singing part of this. Okay, so now I'm just going to sing a little bit of something that you will hear later. So you see that the numbers are generally around the same overall. So that's just what's a little bit with the headset. So I was hoping that I would be able to ask an audience member to come up and work with the headset. Unfortunately, the connection is dependent sometimes upon the room it's in, and in this room the connection doesn't really work very well. But this is the headset. So it's typically worn like this. You put it on here. Everything is behind the ears, and you put the ear clip on like it was shown in the pictures before, and then sensors on the forehead, and then that's what you could see transmitted through the ear. So it looks kind of silly, but that's what this looks like. And we can just pass this on to people wanting to see that. So just while that's going around, I'm going to finish up here with a little self-reflection of what was going on. So I faced a couple other challenges other than figuring out what I was going to do for a 20% project in the first place. And right at the beginning of the semester, we were supposed to make a rough plan to submit as part of our top proposals. I found it hard for myself to follow this because they were very rough plans that was just what we wanted to have accomplished at the end of each month. And while I could have made a more detailed plan, I didn't, which was not a very good decision. And I also didn't realize my timeline and what I actually had to get done until half of my timeline was gone. So in an attempt to make up for this, I spent a lot of extra research time looking at several different music genres, some of which you saw on the slideshow here, and then also looking at some of the different parts of the brain and the more specific benefits of the different genres of music. And this led into my next challenge, which I faced throughout March and into early April. And that was about how I wanted to visually represent the sound waves, which we did with this headset. Originally, I unfortunately, it would be very complicated, and I would not have enough time to do it. So instead, I looked at machines or devices that I could buy that would help me do the same thing. So I ended up finding the NeuroSky headset, which is going around now, on Amazon, and I looked into it and I downloaded the app so I could see that it would actually work, hopefully, which it did. And simply so I could have this earlier on in the project and not get it just a week before this, I decided to hold a big sale with all of my friends, as it would be an easy and good short notice fundraising. And all of this led into my biggest challenge that I faced throughout the entire semester, which was what would be my greater purpose of this project? Who will this project help? How will it help them more specifically? And even how will it help myself? So I guess the best answer I have for this is that I'm trying to spread the true knowledge of music and all of the benefits that you can have from listening to all of these different genres. It also helps us to deepen everyone's understanding of what's actually happening in the brain, and then, like I said before, the more specific benefits. So I know that I personally will apply this to studying and while doing homework and other assignments, and also in general, like now I know what music to listen to if I would rather relax or focus, or if I wanted to be more motivated and confident. So this helped me figure all that stuff out. I hope that it will do the same for all of you. Obviously, I cannot make you listen to music you do not want to hear, but now you know all of the different benefits that you can have from listening to all these different music genres. So I really hope that the kids know it. I really hope the parents know who he is. But there is a wise man who is basically in this quote saying my message, or what I want everyone to get from this. So quote the piano man himself. Billy Joel once said, "I think music in itself is healing. It's an explosive expression of humanity. It's something we are all touched by. And no matter what culture we're from, everyone loves music." Any questions?
Thank you for your thoughtful presentation. I enjoyed it not only because I learned a lot, but also because it made me feel better about my life choices. To a lot of jazz. And in fact, I'm so glad I was here because I was reading an article this morning about how jazz is the best music to listen to for your health. And one of the things they talked about a little bit in that article is about improv, right? Improvising with music, and how the fact that jazz is not always predictable because they are improvising over right throughout the songs makes it kind of engage your mind more. And as you were presenting, I was thinking, well, freestyling in hip hop is something similar, right? Where there's an unpredictability to it. So I wonder if in your research you came across anything about how music that perhaps is more structured, something like classical, might affect you differently than something that is less structured, like say jazz.
Yeah. I didn't see anything specific in the research, but from watching a lot of movies that involve jazz, and also from what I did research, I think that the more structure doesn't as much touch the more creative part of your brain. Like classical doesn't do that as much. I think that the genre is more like singing, jazz, hip hop, like ones you were just mentioning, do work more with creativity because in the moment that you think of all these different things, like if I were to make something up right now and then say it, that uses more of the creative and original part of my brain versus the set in stone type, which I think is more classical. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I think that there is a slight difference in the parts of the brain that it is a kind of using.
And I think you were mentioning about singing, STEM probably being actively something to do, because I don't think any of the information you're presenting about different genres was about being the performer of those genres. It was about being the listener. But you're the performer when you're talking about the benefits of singing, right?
Yeah. So I think that it's a similar thing of what we were just talking about in the last question of thinking of something in the moment. So when I was working with the headset, recording the part where I was just humming something, then even though it had like similar effects to when I listened to jazz, just because that was a similar type of music, it felt a little bit different. I felt more relaxed because I was doing it in that moment. But you also like you have more tension. I feel like in that moment, even though it balances with meditation, which is very interesting, because in the moment you're trying to think of what you're doing. So like if I were to think of something to say now, then you're more attentive towards it. But then with the other musical benefits from singing, then you're kind of still in that meditative state and relaxed state. So there are a bunch of like all these different effects, and I do want to keep looking more into this as I discover other genres of different feelings while singing or listening.
Did you, so you tested yourself singing and listening to jazz and other genres. Did you compare this to other controls like meditating and looking at the way your brain waves ended up changing while you were meditating and being silent or focusing on one particular component in meditation?
So while I was wearing a headset?
Yeah.
So I did actually, it's not any recording or anything, but at home I did work a little bit with the headset. So I like to listen to more of the slow instrumental stuff, even if it's not necessarily jazz. But I found that I felt a lot more relaxed, and then I also, with the headset, the numbers on meditation were a lot higher, and the attention was lower, even though the numbers were still there. So the numbers can stay at zero. Like in the first part of the video that I showed working with the headset, then you could see that I was focusing on just one object, and then the attention numbers were really high. But at the same time, like, the numbers didn't hit zero. So when I was also doing stuff with the headset, I found that even though the brain was kind of hard to see, the numbers helped a lot when I was listening to different types of music. And I did try out some of the music I was talking about. So there were some different effects. But in general, I think I chose these four to talk about more specifically because, like I was saying just before, the numbers didn't drop down to zero or were within 0 to 10 on either attention or meditation while I was listening to any of these genres of music. So even though you might feel more relaxed in a moment or more attentive in a moment, depending on what music you listen to, then the numbers are still there for both. So it's beneficial for you in different ways, and it shows that your mind is working in all these different ways.
Do you play an instrument?
I don't anymore. I used to. I played saxophone for a few years. That was the most recent instrument because I did love jazz a lot. I still do. I just didn't play saxophone. So now I just sing a lot.
Do you think the effects would be the same for an individual who might be playing an instrument?
They're generally the same, but sometimes more of the benefits that I was talking about in the 10 off the benefits slide are amplified because their brain is used to using all those different parts of the brain since you have to use them to play music, and especially, so what I was talking about in singing, about the coordination of the nervous system, that's that pretty much goes the same for when you play music because it has to coordinate your fingers to play an instrument. So sometimes maybe more so than if you just sing. Did anyone want one of the science handouts? Yes, please.
Yeah, let's grab one for Kate.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah. 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 What? Just waiting for his research. Yeah. How far they go. Cody, 1 second.